And again, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Margaret Moale, and I am the Associate for Community Development and Constituent Relations for Self-Development of People. I will introduce our panelists shortly, but before I do that, I wanted to make sure that our staff colleagues, any of them that are on the call, have a chance to self-introduce as well. I think I see Nina. I'm not sure if anyone else is on. Nina, do you want to go ahead?
Hello everyone, I'm Nina Lewis and I'm Administrative Assistant with Sdlp. And I will be short since I want to leave that time for real important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Okay, so our panelists today are the Reverend Gregory Bentley, co-moderator for the Presbyterian Church USA. And we also have Norris Henderson. He's the founder and executive director with Voice of the Ex-Offender. We have Monica Jenner, who is with Fair Chances. And we have Minister Chibueze Okori with Church of the Gethsemane. And we have Katie Talbot with Neighbor to Neighbor. And we also have Bonifacio Alemany with LifeSpring Health Systems right here in Louisville, Kentucky. We are delighted to share that our panelists are coming from different parts of the country. And so we are hopeful that you have reviewed their bios, which you would have received when you registered. So that would give you more insights into where they're coming from and also what they do. But we're so grateful to each of the panelists for joining us today. And at this time, would invite them to just do a very quick intro, whatever you would like to share of yourselves, each of the panelists, please. And then Alonso will get us started with the next section. Who would like to start us off?
I'll start by saying it's a pleasure to be here to do this work, to talk about this work, but also to talk about practical steps. And so it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I'm happy to live in Louisville and also have the opportunity, for those who are not familiar with the geography, Louisville's in Kentucky, but also I have the opportunity that I work in Indiana across 11 counties with our health system here. And we have a lot of things to bring to the table. So we're really excited to be part of this today.
My name is Monica Janer. I'm with Northwest Initiative, the ARROW program. I served 28 years in prison. And when I was released, I really had a passion to go help juveniles that were coming to the prison system. I was seeing 13, 14, and 15-year-old kids come to prison with natural life sentences who would never be released again. So it was my goal to go help work in the places where kids were being housed that had gotten in trouble. And of course, because of my record, I was told I couldn't get a job in any of those areas, which was my first slap in the face about what it was that reentry was going to be like. So when I started this reentry program, I said, I mean, when I came to this agenda as being asked to come to sit on a board for reentry, I said, I must have put this here for a reason. I'm going to go ahead and follow those, what he has planned for me. And when I started doing the reentry work, I came into the I was blessed to have the path of Sdlp and get a grant. And because of Sdlp, I have opened up my community. I have changed the dynamics in the criminal justice system all over our state. And yeah, I just have to say that being part of Sdlp has been my blessing.
Hello, my name is Chibueze Okori. I'm from the Church of Gethsemane. I've been involved with the Church of Gethsemane for the past 30 years. This is the 30th year, and I've been on the staff for the past 27 years. My job, I reach out to those in prison and those who have already been released. I conduct the prison ministry of the Church of Gethsemane. And I have seen a lot of people come out from prison and become law-abiding citizens, have their own families, and they're doing very good paying their taxes. And I'm so glad to join you today and to discuss the work I do and the mission of the Church of Gethsemane. Thank you.
My name is Nora Simpson, and I am the executive director and founder of Voice Experience. We used to be known as Voice Ex Offender, but we're known as Voice Experience. I spent 27 years, 2 months, and 18 days in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I had a life sentence, and I prayed that, one, if I ever got out, I wouldn't forget where I came from, nor the people I left behind. And so for the last 18 years, this has been my journey of trying to change the laws as they exist here in Louisiana and trying to help as many people as I can to be free.
I'm Katie Talbot, also previously incarcerated person, the Holyoke organizer for Neighbor to Neighbor, which is a statewide organization here in Massachusetts. I got involved with Neighbor to Neighbor after my first incarceration, and they were working on a Jobs Not Jails omnibus bill. And, you know, just learned through political education in this organization about the larger problems. And our incarceration rate in this country is just one of the broken systems. I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks.
And thank you to our panelists. We are excited to be able to have this conversation. And before that, we will ask just for a few opening remarks from Reverend Dr. Michael Askew, who is the former committee member of the National Self-Development of People and the Presbytery of Florida Sdlp committee moderator for the Presbytery of Florida. And Michael, if you could just give us a quick, brief history of Sdlp so folks who are not familiar can understand what it is we do and why we do it.
Thank you. In 1970, Foreman presented a Black manifesto, and that's James Foreman, to the Presbyterian Church at the 182nd General Assembly. The Presbyterian Church listened thoughtfully to Foreman, though the message was uncomfortable. In response to Foreman's presentation, the 182nd General Assembly in 1970 of the United Presbyterian Church USA of America gave its final approval to the plan to raise funds for the Self-Development of People program. The first meeting of the National Committee of Self-Development of People was held September 29th and 30th, 1970. The committee met with the mandate from the Assembly to use funds in distress areas and among deprived people. Almost 50 years later, the Presbyterian Church remains committed to the mandate. The Self-Development of People is now celebrating 50 years. And as I said to the last group at the last meeting, I'm very happy to be part of the Self-Development of People family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, very much. Margaret?
Sure. So what are we hoping that you will take away from today's Dialogue and Listening Forum? The lessons that we are hoping you can learn from today's conversation will hopefully guide your efforts around issues of mass incarceration and how it ties in with eradicating poverty and other social and economic justice issues as you hopefully are involved in your communities in tackling issues to do with mass incarceration and poverty, both this year and leading into 2022. We hope that as you listen to our panelists, you will take away new perspectives and new ideas of how together we can engage in the work around mass incarceration and what re-entering citizens face and also poverty eradication in our communities in a way that empowers others to form effective collaborations and partnerships to improve our communities. So those are a couple of takeaways that we're hoping come out of our time together. And without much further ado, I invite Alonzo to start us off with our first question.
Thank you, Margaret. And so to our panelists, could you share with us best practices about relationship building, partnership and engagement, networking, folks taking concrete action, power, and interests? And so as you do that and talk a little bit more about what you do, could you share these with us? What are the best practices about relationship building and partner engagement, especially in the work that you are doing, and why? So I want to throw that question out to the panel, and whoever would like to start can get us started.
I'll jump out there, Brother Alonzo, and take a crack at that question. To start off, I want to share a quick story of an experience of mine. When I was after release from prison, I went to school for social work and applied for a summer job at an agency for social workers. And we talked about me just returning to society, being justice involved. And the staff person was very excited, and the job offered X amount of dollars. And the staff person said, I'm going back to the board to tell them I found somebody that's great for the job, and I'm going to ask them to increase the salary. I said, well, that's wonderful. You know, catching that bus an hour out here and an hour bus ride home on the TARC with the city transit, I appreciate that. And a couple weeks later when we talked, and staff person came back and said, the board of directors, they approved the job to hire you. And I was happy. She said, there's a catch. She said, they didn't approve any pay. And I had to think, because sometimes I need a minute to process. And so not only did they approve my hiring for the job, but they did not approve the extra pay. And then they didn't even approve the original pay and wanted me to do that work for free, knowing I rode the city bus an hour to get there, an hour to get home, just returning to society after over a decade. And some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to talk about how we do that and how folks can avoid making those type of errors and the way we operate. And so when I think about answering your question, Brother Alonzo, I think about it starts with value in people. And I have a handout that I'll provide to distribute after this today on how we value people. But I have a handout entitled 5 Steps to Engage in Marginalized People. And you don't have to worry about taking notes. You can read the handout if you'd like. But when we're talking about justice involved people and mass incarceration and how to engage them, step number 1, pay us. Count your ducks before you ask us to come talk, to come build, to be part of something, to figure out how you're going to use the resources you have and the privilege that you have to examine us. Pay us for our time. As we talk today, we know that people who are incarcerated are 10 times more likely to be homeless. People who have been justice involved are more likely to not seek health care because of research has shown us there is discrimination against that in healthcare. And I'll talk a little bit about what LifeSpring does to address that. But at the end of the day, all these things revolve around resources. You know that as a formerly incarcerated person or a justice involved person, getting a job, in particular African-American returning citizens, are at an extremely elevated rate for not getting those jobs. So if everything revolves around resources, count your ducks before you ask us to come on board. That's how you begin to get engaged.
Thank you, my pleasure. I want to really quickly, I think we might have missed the incredible Reverend Gregory Bentley. And I want Greg to answer this question. Also tell us, Greg, who you are and what you do. Because folks in this church, they should know who Greg is. And Greg is amazing. Greg, tell us who you are, what you do, and get to that first question.
Well, I was really enjoying, man. I didn't know you were going to swing back around. I would have gotten it in at some point. I'm Greg Bentley. I'm the pastor of Fellowship Presbyterian Church in Huntsville, Alabama, and also co-moderator along with my dear sister, Ilona Street Stewart of the 224th General Assembly, but to borrow a phrase from the Williams brother, that great gospel singing group from Mississippi, I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody who can change anybody, who is just glad to be in the number with folks who actually have their hands in the soil and their shoulders to the wheel, making this thing go. So just glad to be here and here to learn.
And Brother Greg, what do you think about best practices about relationship building?
Well, you know, I think about something that the psychiatrist Carl Menninger said, that if you want to kind of measure the humaneness of any society, look at how it treats its incarcerated. And this gets to the issue of relationships and vulnerability. You know, I think as moral actors and agents in the world, we should always be asking, who are the most vulnerable among us? Who are most open to the depredations of this system that we live in? And that's where we need to direct most of our resources and our energy. All too often, though, we are operating with an imperial consciousness in the church toward the same people, the same way the empire does. So part of what has to happen, there has to be a regeneration, as what John talked about in John 3 with Nicodemus. We must be born again. There has to be a revolution in consciousness of how we see one another, especially the littlest, the least, the left behind. This issue is really right on time because it aligns with Matthew 25, which is, has three foci: building congregational vitality, eradicating systemic poverty, and dismantling structural racism. And that vision is really the organizing principle for the work of the Presbyterian Mission Agency right now, which is being massively led by the Reverend Dr. Diane Moffett. So we have our hands on something by lifting up this issue, because this is one of the most salient examples, especially of those last two foci that I mentioned, dismantling structural racism and eradicating systemic poverty, because those two are interlocking realities. They're inextricably linked to one another. So, but it all boils down to, and I think Brother Bonifacio got at it, that, this boils down to relationships. Those are the tracks on which redemptive realities roll. How do we make love real and palpable is in how we relate to one another. And as I said before, especially the most vulnerable among us. So I mean, there's really no secret sauce to this. It's really, it's not something we have to wring our hands about. It's the real issue is, do we have a want to spirit? Do we want to do this work? Or do we want to just kind of get on the conversation carousel? Have good conversation, get intellectually stimulated, and then wait to the next conversation. The real issue is who's ready to plunge their hands in the soil, not knowing everything, not having it all figured out, but who's ready to do that. And as the African proverb says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And our greatest teachers, I think, on this panel are those who have been incarcerated, who have come through it, and who are now have invested and involved in making sure that reality can be redeemed and transformed.
Before somebody jumped in to speak, I wanted to make sure that our panelists got a chance for that first question. What are best practices, Brother Chukwueze?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. In 1988, the Church of Gethsemane created a program called Project Connect. Project Connect that network with men and women in our correctional department facilities. The purpose of this is to be able to reach those who are struggling within our criminal justice system, bringing souls to God, valuing people for who they are, according to our friend Bonifacius mentioned it. and the creating opportunities for people to move forward after they did their time in prison. So we are the church called to leave our pupils sometimes, most of the time, go into the prison where most people don't want to go, where people whom we have condemned are doing their time. The Church of Gethsemane continues to work with other churches and organizations in our community to carry out the interfaith partnership for social justice. We also receive support from our sister churches and individuals that help us to meet the needs of those who are incarcerated in our prison system. And we believe that people can change. We believe that God can help, God can use anyone to do his ministry. Our door have never been shut. The door of the Church of Gethsemane is open for anyone who wishes to receive our help. Myself, I joined the church 30 years ago. The door of that church was wide open for me. I don't know what would have happened to me today if it's not the Church of Gethsemane. And 27 years ago, I joined the staff. All I do and all I have to do and love to do all my life is to reach out to those who have no voice for themselves, people like me who had no voice. And most people don't know what is going on in our criminal justice system, unless when they have somebody in there or they happen to join the system. That is when they start to speak out about the injustice done to the minorities. So this is what the Church of Gethsemane do, to reach out to those who are in prison, and not only that, help them to re-enter society upon their release. And we know quite all right that the system, prison system, incarceration does not end when someone comes back home. It continues. Sometimes some people find it difficult to cope with outside life. So the Church of Gethsemane jumped in there to help them grow again, to help them find their paths, to help them create that road for a better tomorrow for themselves and their families. So I would like to discuss more about what we do later on. So let me leave you to other people to speak.
I love hearing what everybody else is doing in their best practice on what we do. And when I came home in 2007, you didn't tell people that you had been incarcerated. There was that red flag on the top of your head that people defined you by the worst mistake. So you just didn't let them know that you had a worst mistake. So I started working for the ARROW program, which is a grassroots reentry program. And part of our job was to go out door to door into the community to see what their needs were. And one of the questions on the survey was, do you know anybody that's been incarcerated or been incarcerated or in prison? And I can't tell you how many times doors literally closed in my face when I said that statement. And it was like people had this stereotype. Their hearts and minds were closed. And it was my job to go ahead and change the hearts and minds of this community by letting them know. But what I found out while I was going canvassing and door to door and reaching into the community to change this mindset, the people that I was dealing with had fear. They had shame. There was times when the door was closed on in my face, and I would just bang again and say, wait a minute, I'm here to help. I want to help them get a job. I want to do the things that will help. I found out that the one house where they literally closed the door in my face, they had a daughter that had just got out of prison, and it was shame. No, they did not want to admit that they had a person that had been incarcerated. So that was my job. And one of the things that I did, and so blessed with the Sdlp grant that I got, was I brought Michelle Alexander of the new Jim Crow to Lansing, Ingham County. We spent the entire day. We introduced legislation for getting the box off the job application. And then the next session, we had her with all the legislators. And when we went in, we had partisan. When we walked out, we had bipartisan, because she had those people listening in the playing connect the dots. People's light bulbs were going off. Oh my gosh, she's really right. What she's got to say. And then we did an auditorium event for the community. And from that day forward, in Ingham County, we have had so much change in the criminal justice system based on starting out with Michelle Alexander. I go into the community, I hold events. We tell stories. We take people that do book writing, have written books, and brought them so that they can explain, their dynamic and what brought them to the system. We did the 13th at the First Presbyterian Church, where we actually are housed. And we brought out that community, and the entire First Presbyterian Church has now, they ask me every day, Monica, is there something we could do for you guys? We have changed their hearts and minds. And I can't tell you how many Presbyterian churches' doors closed on my face when I went out to engage them to let them know that I was doing the Minute for Mission and that different kind of thing. So it was extremely sad that I had to spend that much time getting light bulbs off, going and changing hearts and minds, but we did it. And it's a strategic process. So yeah, you gotta get people to hear the stories, hear the injustices, and here it is what the needs are. So and that's what we've done in this community. We have done a great job. So now we have people banging on our door every day. What can we do for you? What can we do to help? How can we help you? So yeah, it's been an amazing challenge, but our strategic plan really worked.
I just want to build off a little bit of what Monica and Bonifacio commented on, both valuing our time, our experience, but hearing us, right? I can't tell you how many people when I got home told me I should do this. And if I just did this, things would be better. And I'm telling them I need this. This is what I need. These are the things that I need in order to move forward with my life, and was just ignored. And for us in Neighbor to Neighbor, it's all about relational organizing. And one of the things we bring into all of the spaces that we're in is that if we don't have experience, then we're not leading the way in that, right? Like the people who have had experience in whatever issue we're talking about should be the ones talking. And we need to be listening and not just having assumptions walking in there about if you did A, B, and C, then all would be well, and really hearing folks.
Another thing that I think has to happen, and I think y'all are speaking so beautifully to the issue of the stigmatization that causes formerly incarcerated people to be pariahs in communities. I think one thing that helps us to get beyond that is that we have to see this issue of incarceration not as just an individual matter, but it's a systemic matter. It's a systemic matter that is about power. It's about money. It's about exploitation, and we need to be clear about that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everybody in prison shouldn't be there. That's not what I'm saying. But clearly, when I look at the world, the most dangerous people that I see, some of them run corporations, they run governments, they sit in the pews beside us, and we're looking at the wrong people as the most dangerous people in the room. But that's going to take a whole lot of deprogramming and re-education as to see what the real dangers in our society are, and to really value people as this is where we have to lean on our faith. Do we believe that people are made in the image of God, regardless of what they've done? Do we really believe that? Because that makes all the difference. If I believe I'm dealing with a person who is beloved of God in front of me, I relate to them in a certain way. So this is when we have to put feet to our faith and not just say it as mindlessly as a creed or as a denominational position, but do I really believe that? Do I really believe that the person who is in front of me is made in the image of and beloved by God? Because if you do, that makes all the difference in how you relate to them. And part of what it means to love somebody is to listen to them. You can't love somebody that you're not willing to learn. If you already know all the answers, you can't have a relationship of love. Love it entails listening. It entails listening to, these are my needs. This rather than saying, well, you've been in prison and I know what you need. You need to do this and you need to do that. No, let me hear what you need and let's figure this thing out together. So yeah, I think that this whole removing the stigma and taking the time to have a process of really learning how this incarceration thing came into being, this mass incarceration thing came into being, and how it functions in our society to create a climate of inequality and exploitation.
I like to piggyback on that in the sense of, I think in reference still to the first question, is really how people show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because when I was inside, every year they would have these evangelists come to the prison, Cowboys for Christ, you name them. And folks would come sit on my bed. And my first question with them would be, are you willing to go and speak to the king?
Mm.
And they were kind of like, well, they told us we can't have them kind of conversations about, your conditions, about why you're here.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, you need to get up off my bed. Because at that point, it's like, people tell you in a minute, it's like, well, I'm coming. Because, everybody want to quote scripture about, did you visit me while I was in prison? And I started asking the question is, are you doing that for you? Or are you actually doing it for me? And 9 times out of 10, it was for them to alleviate some guilt that they had about not visiting somebody in prison. So it wasn't like they had my vested interest at heart. And so, given not just my personal circumstances, but, I should tell folks all the time, that fence wasn't to keep us in, it was to keep y'all out. Y'all have the opportunity now to go back and tell the king what you have seen and who deserves or don't deserve to be here. And if you're telling me now that the people told you upon admittance that that was one of the things you couldn't do, you shouldn't be here. So it's kind of like how these relationships get established from the get-go. Because I was listening and when the lady was saying that, folks who have family members who have been incarcerated and ashamed to say anything. And it's tragic that the faith community is the last ones to step up. When I go to these institutions, that's the first question I ask. How many people in here have a loved one in prison? And then when everybody started raising their hand up, I'm like, well, why this church is not moving in a direction to kind of like course correct this ship? And so it goes about how do we see each other? And it's like what Gregory was saying about the humanity in each other. And if we can't see the humanity in each other, we will never get to where we're trying to go. I don't care how gifted or how talented we become. If somebody don't see my humanity, I would never be a father. I would never be seen as a grandfather, never as an uncle, never as a brother. I will always be seen as an other, as a felon, as an ex-con, as a burglar, as a murderer, as a kidnapper. And so until we can kind of like see the human side of us, I think that's where this thing starts. So that's where the relationship actually has to start, is about how people show up. How do you come to this thing? I have a friend of mine that always say, whoever I go to the dance with is who I'm going to leave with. And that's how it has to be. I mean, you have to be that same person that when you come there and you meet me, you have to be willing to take me back with you. And you know, the tragic thing about this is that folks will say they're there with good intentions to want to do the right thing about it. But then because of all the misinformation that they've been indoctrinated with, oh, don't go down there, don't trust them. They're going to be trying to run some kind of scheme on you. Don't give them none of your personal information. Don't take no personal information from them. And it's like, well, how do you build a relationship? Relationships are built on trust. And if you can't start it off right, it's never going to get going. So I would just venture to say that real recognize real. And people will recognize right off the top, especially folks who are inside, who have been inside, they would recognize right from the very beginning whether or not you have their best interests at heart. And just like Bonifacio was saying, is that this one person was like, saw the value added that he brought to the scenario. But somebody didn't see the same value that here's somebody who didn't have anything, that took 2 hours out of his life to come and offer something to you, and they wasn't gracious enough to accept it, you know? And so I kind of like just pause there because got a lot of other questions that I think we need to really hit in, but it kind of like starts with how people show up.
And if I could jump in and make 2 quick comments. One of the things Brother Greg was talking about was the stigma associated, right? I think that's a common theme among all of us, right? That we experience that stigma, but that also leads to things like PTSD and other mental health disorders. We know that returning citizens like experience higher rates of overdose, lifetime suicidality attempts, physical health issues, death, homelessness, all at elevated rates compared with the general population. And so we really should look for programs. I use LifeSpring as an example. We have a few different forensics units in different locations. And when we have someone ask me someday, they said, you know, you have a therapy office right across the street from the courthouse and the jail. And we had a conversation about that, but there's value in that. There's value and placing yourself in the spaces where people are, because one thing reminded this person was that when people are coming out of jail, when people are going to courts, mental health is there. That anxiety is there. You never know what that could mean to somebody coming out of that jail or that court and looking across the street and seeing not only a place that has those resources, but that also addresses those barriers. We know that Medicaid, getting back on Medicaid when you get out of prison is a problem. There's no programs to literally help folks get back health insured and things like that. So it's a great thing, the model that LifeSpring uses, that we turn no one away. We realize that we need these programs. We need to be addressed in mental health. We need care managers, case managers to help people navigate the different nuances in life. Yeah, so I think there is a lot of value and thinking about that as we figure out how we engage.
One thing I would like to share is let us look into this. People are released from prison because they did their time. They come back home, they did their parole. Some are life parole, some do 5 years paroling. Why are we not trusting that that person have changed? Why are we not opening our doors in our churches to welcome somebody who have done their time and willing to participate in their phase of the community? Why are we condemning and why are we passing judgment, still judgment? And we have to understand again that the record, someone who did time in prison have a lifetime record. They are now wiping out anything. It cannot get a job. Most places you can't get housing. As soon as they ask you, have you been convicted before? Even some of the states that have passed the law, they still discriminate against you because of the record. So I'm saying this because we have a lot to do as church and communities to start to look into the problem a formerly incarcerated member of the society is facing. This is lifetime. Where is the empathy? How do we let that person, how can we create something that will make that person move forward with life without thinking that he or she is not welcomed? We are not welcoming, and we are not believing that people can change. And we are all children of God.
Yes.
So this is something I would like us to take to our churches and our communities, agencies, organizations, to look into the suffering of those who have done time in prison and how much will they continue to go through that.
You know, one thing, I think we have to maintain what I call a bifocality. What do I mean by that? With one lens, we have to look at the challenges of the individual, and the other is that we have to look at the sickness of the society and the system that we live in. Let me try to unpack this a little further. We look at Mark 5, the story of the Gerasene demoniac, and Jesus encountered this man who was possessed of a demon, and Jesus asked him, you know, what's your name? And here you have this Jewish man saying, my name is Legion. He's calling himself by the chief Roman tool of oppression, a legion. This man has internalized his own oppression. And when Jesus heals this man and casts these demons out, did the people cheer? Did they say, oh man, this is great? No, they say, Jesus, get out of here. And part of the reason that I think they did is because now that this man is healed, they have to look at their own sickness. See, many of us hide our own sickness by casting it on and projecting it onto others. So when the genuine healing takes place, we got to do some real soul searching within ourselves. And that takes courage to really see how many of our systems, including our churches, are sick unto death. It's easier to locate the sickness in individuals such as formerly incarcerated people than to really have the courage to examine how sick some of our systems are. So that's the work I think that has to happen. Because it's kind of the chicken or the egg. Sick societies invariably and inevitably produce sick individuals. So it's not just about healing the person, that we have a whole society, a system that needs to be healed and transformed so that we don't continue to replicate these realities.
I think you're right, Brother Bentley. When I think of the issue of mass incarceration, I think of slavery and how we got from slavery to mass incarceration. And I think of how even today, mass incarceration is about money. When we have private corporations who benefit and make a profit and design contracts with states to keep prisons X amount full, you're trading people like property. I would say all over again, but I don't think it ever stopped in America to some degree. We carried it over and we still see that. We're trading people like property. It's all about numbers. But there's a larger connection, like you said. Step 2, you want to engage marginalized populations, do some implicit bias work. I think that would be step 2 for people. Look inside, understand where our values and our beliefs are. Don't harm people by jumping out there to do the work and you don't realize where your values are until you're already causing harm. Take some time to do that internally and what that means.
Thank you all. Really good discussion. All right, so let's move on to our next question. And to some degree, I think a few of you have alluded to this, but we invite each of you panelists to speak to this. What are some concrete actions that your church or organization has taken or could take to engage with communities of returning citizens or around issues of mass incarceration that perhaps other churches or organizations could take? And I'll read that again. What are some concrete actions that your church or organization has taken to engage with communities of returning citizens or around issues of mass incarceration that perhaps other churches or organizations could take? And we will
I'll jump in because our
minutes. I'm sorry, a
That's
couple
right.
minutes, please.
all right. I was just saying our organization is led by 90% of the folks who work here are formerly incarcerated. And so we lead by example. We kind of like practice what we preach. We tell people about, we understand the want, needs, and desires of each other. And I think the example we try to set is to have other people that if they're formerly incarcerated or returning citizens in their communities, in their congregations, you got to lift them up. You got to give them the opportunity to lead and be willing to follow, because we're experts by experience. We may not have all those alphabets behind our names, but I would venture to say anything dealing with criminal justice in this state and in this country, I can have a conversation and go toe to toe with anybody. And so I think that's the value added that we bring, is that we bring our whole self. We don't bring a part of who we are, we bring our whole self, the redemption side of us, whether you're in there for something you did or didn't do, at some point, that person has reconciled with that, have kind of like done the metamorphosis, and he has a lot, she has a lot to offer. And so I think the biggest thing is kind of like folks following our lead, or following that lead of that person, that formerly incarcerated person. And it's like the conversation open up, treating that person as an equal. Don't see that person as a grantee. See that person as an equal partner in the relationship. Because it goes back to not only establishing a relationship, but whether or not this is going to be a relationship or is going to be a transaction. And I think that's the thing that people have to really be mindful of. Do you want a relationship or do you want a transaction? Transaction is just exchanging goods for services. But if it's a relationship, it's about putting money in the bank and banking on the fact that at some point the dividend is going to come. Like folks always talking about the ROI, what's the return on the investment? And that's what we're looking for. And it's the return on investment in the lives of people who've been formerly incarcerated. But it has to be demonstrated in a way that I can't have a staff of 40 people and I have 2 formerly incarcerated people, but I'm saying I'm lifting up these folks. No, you're not. You're holding them back, because they probably can lead or do a better job probably than 38 of the other people that you actually have on the staff. So not being afraid to take chances with folks and giving folks an opportunity to demonstrate to you that they can earn the spot that they're seeking. Not that they want a handout, they just want a hand up.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Just one of the things I meet people where they're at, right? We got mamas coming out of prison that now have to take care of their babies and ain't got no childcare. Have some childcare if you're having meetings. If it's not in their neighborhood and you're asking folks to leave their neighborhood to go to a meeting, offer rides, offer food, like meet people where they're at and accept that, right? Like if you haven't come out of prison, you have no idea the challenges it is that people face just being someplace on time, right? With transportation issues, housing issues, childcare stuff. So just making sure that those things are available when you're asking people to show up.
I think about concrete ways that faith communities and congregations and organizations can engage in some of the work that we've done, or that I have had the opportunity to be part of locally. We've in Louisville, we passed a ban the box ordinance a few years ago that takes the question about incarceration off the job application, because as we just talked about, there are several barriers to employment, which correlates to higher health disparities, homelessness, things like that. In Kentucky, or if you're familiar with the region, we're one of the last draconian states in the way we disenfranchise people legally as citizens. Kentucky is one of the final strongholds in how we return or have that process. Currently, we have an organization we've been working for about 15 years across the state to pass voting rights legislation in Kentucky. Right now, I'm one of three folks on a federal lawsuit against the state of Kentucky in the governor's office asking for a fair restoration of voting rights. A small, simple fact I'll leave you with is in all the work that I've had the opportunity to be part of, all of the expertness that I bring to the table, all of the people I've assisted to register to vote, hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, the policies I've worked on, the lobbying I've done, the lobbying training I've done with people, so that we can create equitable systems. In my state where I live, if I were to register to vote today, I would be looking at prison time. Let that sink in. Let that sink in.
I think I kind of, oh, sorry, I didn't know you were done.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I'll give more resources and opportunities in the handout.
Well, strategically, like I said, I went into my community, went door to door, but I also worked with all the churches, and I would reach. I created a coalition in our county with all the different churches and brought them together, and everybody decided to kind of do their. There's a small reentry in each one of their in each one of their churches to do their share with Matthew. They wanted to come to the prison. I would connect them to people in prison. They would contact me to find out people that they were visiting, how safe was the conversation? Should they let them come to the house? How much of the reentry they should do? But I've got so many churches involved in our community to step in and try to help with the different things that we need to do. Like I said, when I got that first Sdlp grant and the qualification or the criteria was that you had to go to 4 churches and share your mission so that you could open them hearts and minds. The door closed on 3. And I just refused to accept that. And then when I went to the First Presbyterian Church, they made up for every one of those churches that closed my door. And we worked together. Actually, there's another webinar tomorrow about the gun violence in our community. All of our churches are working together because we have that problem. And that's part of the mass incarceration struggle. We've got to get it on the front end. We can definitely do the back end work, but it's better. And it's one of my major projects is keeping people in the community with their families so we don't continue this cycle of incarceration.
The one that go ahead, brother.
I'm sorry. At the Church of Gethsemane, we have annual newsletter that we sent into every prison, every institutional correctional facility. Through our newsletter, we are able to reach out to inmates, those who are incarcerated, especially those who are coming back home, to know about the church and to prepare themselves for, to be interviewed by our staff, by myself and others in the church. The newsletter help us to reach out to them, and they write the church, get to know the church. We establish a relationship with them, and we have a program, our membership correspondence course, 7-part membership correspondence course, which is designed for those doing time. When they finish that course, we send them certificate of completion. The certificate of completion will also help them during their parole hearing. So the parole board, we know that they have a link out there. That is the Church of Gethsemane. who we welcome them upon release. So through this, we were able to connect other community persons and churches who join us in prison visits. And we interview them and tell them the rules and regulations, before you visit. Sometimes it's crazy to go in there to visit. So we get involved with our community and other churches. Those who cannot do what we do, they volunteer to help us reach out to those in prison. And those volunteers could be letter writing. We send letters in prison, we send packages, we visit and connect with loved ones and friends, and keep that connection moving. And this is where we can be able to work with those who have not been to prison before, to take them to prison to see what it is to go inside the prison, and they see what people are going through in prison. Mostly our sister churches, members of the other churches, and the community persons. So we are still doing more to get other people to join us. If they cannot do what we do, come to Church of Gethsemane, and we will take you inside the prison. There must be something you must do. Something is out there for you to do to contribute in our prison ministry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go for it, Brother Greg. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that we do through our local chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference here in Huntsville is to help formerly incarcerated people get their voting rights restored, because we're in a state where felons lose their voting rights. And I find it interesting. We're in a country where we can rush through an infrastructure bill, but we can't figure out how to secure people's voting rights, something that is fundamental to a democracy. I can't think of anything that is more fundamental than one person, one vote. And my point of view is that even when folks are incarcerated, they should never lose their voting rights. They should be punished for their crimes, but they're still citizens. But that's another issue that we have to work on. The other is, I think each and every one of us, we have to do this individually, congregationally, and denominationally. Look at our investment portfolios, look at our 401ks and pensions. How much of that is tied to corporations like Corrections Corporation of America? How do we contribute? How do we participate in feeding this beast of mass incarceration? Because it's one thing to talk about, doing charity work and doing some kind of feel good stuff, but it's another thing when we actually have to put some skin in the game and sacrifice something in order to do what's right. And to do what's pleasing to God. And that's when it hits home, because this thing, as I said, is so interlocking, so tied together. And when we start doing that type of interrogation, then we know we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Brother Greg, for that. I've got another question, and then we're going to open it up for question and answer. But this question is, I'm thinking a lot about what you're all mentioning, especially something that Monica mentioned, something that Katie mentioned about the fear. And communities and churches are sometimes really reluctant to engage with those who've been formerly incarcerated. And sometimes they have no idea. Some of our communities here represented, they have no idea how to get started, right? How have you all gone about getting people interested or mobilizing them to get engaged in this work? Because just as many of you mentioned, this is hard work. People are scared. They don't know, they don't want to let kind of dangerous people in to their churches. They don't know where to start. They're trying to figure out how to do this. They're scared. They don't know what's going on. Can you help some of our folks on this call, maybe some who are already engaged in the process that really need some guidance, or some who are really thinking, and some of our churches are represented, maybe thinking and talking about, how do we do this? How do we fulfill this part of our call in the gospel in taking care of those who have been released from prison? And so what can you tell us? How do you engage folk, and how can you engage some of these folk on the call?
I think one of the things is that folks have to understand the intersecting lines, and all these lines cross each other. I was looking at the news this morning. It was talking about now that the pandemic is kind of like, in kind of like remission, that there's a lot of jobs. But nobody is stepping up saying, well, wait a minute, here's a whole population of people who've been scratching and clawing trying to get jobs. Let's see, can we offer jobs to them? So folks don't see the intersecting line. I gave a presentation to a Black trade union. And these guys was talking about how they was losing members through attrition. And I was like, time out, I got a solution to your problem. My folks are looking for work and they're looking for careers. So the intersecting line is you need union members, my folks need jobs. They didn't see it. They didn't even perceive that here's a whole workforce standing ready, able-bodied to do the job. So we have to see the intersecting lines of what we're doing. Several years ago, longer than several years ago, when I was still inside, we reached out to the teachers union to help us. They were the most powerful union in our state. Hey, why don't y'all help us? Why don't y'all, when y'all go see the governor about a raise, why don't you tell him he can save money? Because for every one of us in jail, that's the salary of 2 of y'all. They ignored us. You know, fast forward a few years, Hurricane Katrina came along, decimated our city. And then the first union to go down was them. And then it was like, nobody wants to help us because you didn't want to help nobody. And so people have to understand those intersecting lines. We're all in this together. If I put a hole in the boat gonna sink. If you put a hole in the boat gonna sink. But if we both man the oars and we keep heaving and hawing, we can kind of like get the job done. So the fear sells, you know, fear sells. These kind of like warm and fuzzy feeling stories, they don't sell newspapers, you know, I don't get it. So like they say, if you bleed, it leads. And so our folk have to fully understand that why is it when something happened to one of us in our community, the first story they tell about us is not all the good things that this guy has done. They look for the single worst thing this person has ever done to tell a story about. And folks in those communities know that, well, he used to be like that, but that's not him no more. And so we have to really take on the role of educating not only ourselves, but educating our folks. You know, I mean, especially in the church, because I tell people all the time, we got to trust God, but we got to tie our camp. You know, and that's that saying that we got to put in work. And the work is that educating our people about what this whole system is about, how this system come to be, you know, and, you know, and I think this is everything happened. I believe everything happened for a reason. This George Floyd moment was the wake-up call, you know, for us to kind of like question ourselves, where are we at in this moment, you know, and we've been seeing that kind of fear all our lives and was afraid to speak out. Now we're not afraid to speak out. And so I think it's easier now to have these hard conversations that, yeah, we're having some challenges in our communities, but what's causing it? What's causing Pookie to be on the corner slinging? You know, because he don't have an opportunity to go get a real job. You know, if somebody, he wants to come in out the rain, somebody have to give him an umbrella.
I'm going to jump in. You know, you talk about fear, and one of the things we have a lot of conversations about with community members that haven't been incarcerated or haven't had family members incarcerated is that people get incarcerated.
I hope we're not going to lose Katie.
Right? And like the things that you've gotten away with that had you been black or brown, you would have gone to jail for, like, you're no better. None of us are any better, right? Like we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. And just because, you know, the person walking in your door was incarcerated, it's no different. And really unpacking that makes a big difference in removing that fear. And really, I think Nora said it before about, you know, connecting back to what our humanity is. And I would also follow up with a more like concrete thing of, don't ask anyone what their crime was, why they went, like, that's none of our business. That's none of our business. Our business is that someone's in front of us today, and the choices that we're making today. And I say that just because I've seen the spiral of how relationships change, and it, you know, yeah, just coming back to our humanity of one another and our imperfections just as being human.
Thank you, Kate.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
How can I, okay. How we can get others involved? We have to start welcoming and the inclusiveness, you know, including people in our mix. And provide formerly incarcerated persons with love, you know, and value them for who they are. The most important thing is to listen to their stories, listen to the stories of somebody, you know, what pains them. Because somebody who did 25 years in prison, 30 years in prison is coming out there. Some of them are angry, some of them are fearful, you know. You don't know what they have in their mind. Just listen to that person. By listening to them, you are helping them to heal the wounds of incarceration. People are wounded. You know, I feel that I did my time, I come out from prison, I am not moving forward, I can't get a job. There's nowhere I belong in the society. People are wounded. So we try to get other people involved here by speaking to other churches and recruiting volunteers to help us reach out to those in prison. We encourage them to sign letters. We send letters to up to 200 people we have in the prison. We send letters and birthday cards to them, and also host annual Christmas party for their children. All this we do, we try to involve other people out there, mostly other churches, to come and see and hear the stories those who are coming home from prison are going to are telling. Where is the anger? What is the anger? What is the problem? Why can't I be allowed to move forward and become a productive member of the society? The stigma and the fear, everything that the society have, is hindering people from moving forward because you don't want them near you. You don't want them to get it. You can't even employ them. There's no likelihood of support. So this is where the Church of Gethsemane comes in here. If they reject you outside, we're gonna love you in our church. You're gonna come here, you're our brother, you're our sister, and we're gonna watch you grow. And we're gonna make you to become a law-abiding citizen. It is hard there. It is very difficult out there to move forward when you don't know where to go and nobody believes you, nobody likes you. So we have to, as I said before, we got to start doing something in our churches. We got to create some programs that will help somebody to mingle with the community when they are released from prison. Even their families. When someone goes to prison, equally their family, they are in prison as well. So the Church of Gethsemane, we speak out to other churches. We try to tell other people to learn how to welcome, and also to help them, those who have jobs, to help them find jobs so that they will move forward. You cannot have housing. You cannot get housing if you don't have a job. And those are the recommendations of the parole board. You got to have housing. How can you have a housing when you don't have a job? Something got to pay for that house. Money got to pay for it. So we have to work in here, no matter how, let's value people. Let's try to help them. Let's watch them grow, and let's make them to be like us, because we are all children of God.
I'm conscious of our time. I want to move into a question and answer period. And first thing I want to do before we do that, I have one person that I want to start us off in this period. His name is Damon Bush. Damon Bush works with Goodwill folks and folks who are returning to society. But Damon, I'm saving him. He's not in this panel because I'm saving him for part 2 of this, which will be at a later date. And that's going to be going inside the prison. And so, but I want to start off the Q&A with him. Damon, I'll give you about a minute, and then we want your questions in the chat. We'll look at them. Raise your hand, whatever you want to do to ask your questions. Damon.
Excuse me, I had myself muted. First, I'm honored to be here with the Reverend Alonzo Johnson, Bonifacio, and the whole staff and the members of this board and what you guys are doing and the work that you're doing. One of the thoughts for me as I do this work as a recruiter for a young adult opportunity campus with Goodwill from 18 to 24-year-olds, mostly justice involved, many barriers. I myself came through this Goodwill process, and I'm honored to be a part of the Goodwill Kentuckiana Works program that they're having here in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. But one of the questions in dealing with the holistic person, that's what I hear people saying, in dealing with the holistic person and connecting value and worth to a society that says there is no value and worth. And so again, to go back and to deal with that traditionalism and to deal with that old infrastructure stuff, we have to show both community partners and those who are looking for employment that, hey, this person who is recently incarcerated has value to add to your company. So when you say that, because everybody's not a believer in the faith, so how does this person add or enrich your company? What is it that this person brings to your company for employment? And also, if we see everyone's value and worth and learn to point to that gift that they have. Us as believers, we understand that God has given us a gift, given us talents. So how do we get to that, whether they're reincarcerated or not? How do we get to that and allow that to shine and then point to this worth and this value in this human being to say, hey, because of this worth, this value and this worth and this gift and this talent, they would add to your company. They would add to and enrich your community. Now, making those things connect, because people understand, hey, I have a gift, I have a talent. If there's an airplane created, a vehicle we like, a watch that we like, it all came from within someone. So if one person has a gift and talent, we all do. So how do we get to that and let that be enriched and empower that? Another thing, when you were talking about the church, and I'm reminded of the road to Damascus with Paul and Ananias. Ananias, who had been in the church for a moment, when he saw Saul, he didn't see Paul. He saw Saul. So when he saw Saul, in his mind, he said, oh, Lord, we don't want him. Do you know what he did, what he was a part of? And I can imagine the Lord saying and to Ananias, you know what? Do you remember some things you did? You remember some things we saw? And so for Ananias, we have too many Ananias in the churches who are saying, oh, not him, for what he did. God, you know what he did and who he is. And so we can take the story from that point to where at the end of that, after that discussion with the Lord, Ananias then came up to Paul and said, hey, brother, and you are released, raised up, let those shells be dropped off your eyes. Because then Ananias was able to see Paul and not Saul. And I thank God for that transformation. There's too many Ananias in the church pointing at, instead of following the mission that God has given them to say, hey, go talk to that individual. Instead, they say, oh, but you know what he did. But again, connecting to the humanity and so much what you guys have been talking about. How do we reach the connectiveness of connecting the value of the ex-offender to the value and worth and gifts of society and saying, hey, this human being has these same choices. Let's foster that and create a safe place for that. And thank you for that moment. I know it was over a moment, but I thank you for over a minute, but I thank you for your time.
Questions? I see some things in the chat. I'm not sure if that's a question or just a statement. Anybody got a question for our panelists? Or are you doing this work and you got a question to ask? This is the time.
I have a question.
Go for it, Lacey.
So I have a question as far as like, I kind of put in the chat, my dad is currently incarcerated and has been, so I kind of have a connection with that, but I've never been incarcerated. So it's kind of one of those things where I just want to know, like, as in my professional life, how do I make that person feel like I hear them and I'm on their side and I think they will succeed?
I think, first of all, you just got to be his daughter. That's the first thing. You have to be his daughter. I mean, when I went to prison, my son was 18 months old and their mama was pregnant with his little sister. When I came home, she had an 8-year-old daughter of her own. But throughout that journey, we kind of like stayed connected. I mean, to the extent when they got of age, they could come visit me themselves. And I realized it was something I'd done right to make them still want to be a part of my life. And so I think the whole thing is, even today with them, and like my daughter now works in the district attorney's office, but it's not like she'd never been 1 minute has been ashamed of her daddy. You know, it's kind of like, no, this is who my daddy is. This is what happened, but this was the lesson learned from that. And it kind of like was the eye opener that, you know, it's easy for us to say, hey, this is a jacked up system. And sometimes people believe it, sometimes they don't, you know. And initially, I saw your initial post in the chat where you say, because you're in a precarious, I ain't gonna say precarious, but you're in a unique situation that your birth father is in prison, but the person who actually raised you was a former correctional officer. So you kind of like is, you know, probably these emotions kind of like bouncing up in the air. But the first thing is that your father, you know, first and foremost, he's your father. And in order for us to receive grace, we got to be willing to give it. And if we're not able, you know, I lost my son while I was in prison. My son was murdered. And I was telling, you know, my family, you know, it's like, wait a minute. You know, at the same time, we're crying for grace and mercy for me. We can't be saying, you know, burn this other person's house down and tie him to a tree. So we have to extend that same grace and mercy to other people. And in this case, it just happens to be, you know, your blood relative. Is that, you know, give them opportunity to, you know, reconcile. I tell people all the time, I kind of like speak in simple ways, is that nobody leaves out the mirror in the morning until they're satisfied with what they see. And that's the same thing. That person has to reconcile. You know, Michael said that man in the mirror. We have to face that man in the mirror, be it male, female. And it's like, what do we see? And the thing you ask yourself is, what do I want from this relationship? And is there actually a relationship? Do I want that relationship? And if so, how do you navigate? I struggle with, even now, you know, how do I be a father to a daughter who was a grown lady when I show back up? But I demonstrate that through I take care of my granddaughters. And so the love that I couldn't give to my daughter is like, I'm gonna shower them with the things I wasn't able or in a position to shower you with. So don't beat yourself up. You know, I mean, I know you probably have some good days and bad days about how to deal with that situation, but don't beat yourself up, because it's going to take a life of its own. Trust me, it's going to take a course of its own. For months and Sundays, I struggle with, how do I intervene? You know, I see something, I'm like, oh, no, that's not my place, because I haven't been here, you know, for the whole while. I shouldn't have a say. But at the same time, she was yearning for me to speak up, Daddy. You know, I'm still your daughter and these are your grandchildren. You have a right to say something. And so, you know, I again, to the extent that, you know, you can hear any of this, it's like, you know, just, you know, it's a process. Trust me, it is a process. And I'm like, I don't know how long your father been away. I was gone almost 30 years. And, you know, never seen my daughter cry, never changed a diaper, never combed her hair. And so, you know, those are real challenges that we face with, other than the fact that I just wasn't there. Well, I wasn't there because of design. It wasn't my choice not to be there. And so, you know, you just have to deal with it. And I think deal with it in the sense that even it was a choice that somebody made to create the third degree situation, it's like, it wasn't with the intent that I'd done this to take myself away from you. You know, it might have been to try to better our situation, our circumstances, and, you know, it just didn't work out, you know? So, you know, I hope you find what you're looking for on your journey. But like I said, again, first and foremost, that's your dad. You know?
Thank you, Norris.
So another question, we have another question in the chat that for the few minutes we have, we can get right on this question with members of the panel. What is the first step to begin preparing a congregation to do this work? Any concrete materials for study, or what to do and not to do? Take it away.
So I'll take a crack at that. As I've mentioned, I have a handout that will be going out after this entitled 5 Steps to Engage in Marginalized People. This applies specifically to re-entering citizens. And so I'll give you real quickly the 5 steps, but pay attention for the handout. Step number 1 is pay us, value who we are as people. Step number 2 is look inside. Let's do some implicit bias testing. Step number 3, let's decolonize the way we think. And step number 4, let's start doing steps 2 and 3 in group and community. And then step number 5, let's engage in the work. And so 5 concrete steps that you can do individually within your group, within your congregation, that can get you prepared and engaged in this work. And that handout, I'll include links to some of the work we're doing here in Kentucky, and as well as that we're doing regionally, and as well as information to contact any of the panelists here. So many people doing great work. That's always an easy plug-in when you see people doing great work. Always understand this is about resources. And if you have resources, then let's put them up.
And our Matthew 25:36 is a very good guidance, you know, which we guide out if you want to start to reach out. As you said, I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. And I was in prison, you visited me. Let's put that in our mind before you start doing this. And it's just like a commitment of love, a commitment of forgiveness, you know, and it pays back with a lot of gifts that person that invested in will give back to the community. We got to be able to commit ourselves and be able to. You can't just go to prison if you don't value that person. You can't just go there to visit if you don't have that love or forgiveness. Sometimes in my church, we don't. Oh, he did this, he did that. Oh, we can't see that person. I can't see. No, those commitment is there. Commit yourself with love and expect a good outcome from it, because that person is going to change.
Thank you so much, Chibueze and everyone else. At this point, we recognize our time is up, but we would like to ask, we have a few more questions in the chat. Do you want us to keep going, or do you want us to wrap up? Maybe we keep going for another 10 minutes or so, for those of you that are able to stay, so we can get to the questions, or tell us what you prefer.
This must be good, Margaret. Anytime anybody want to stay on a Zoom call longer than it's supposed to go, it means that this is good stuff. So I am excited. If you want to stay on, we are willing to stay on.
All right.
And those who can't, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So the next question that I see in the chat, there are lots of really good questions, but there is a question about what can be done about the money being made off the incarcerated and their family. Anybody, any of the panelists, please jump in.
I think first and foremost, and I think it's been mentioned by other panelists, really understanding what money is being made off of incarcerated folks and their families on the outside. We count folks that are incarcerated in our census, right? We'll let the sheriff's department make money off them. We'll let our state representatives be decided on folks that are incarcerated. And then, I mean, in Massachusetts, we had a sheriff who was charging people daily to be incarcerated in his jail. Like, that's insane, but people don't know, right? So like really educating ourselves on what the profits are that folks are that's being made. I think it was mentioned before about checking out our 401ks and what stocks we have and who's really connected to this. You know, Shuris, I think Shuris makes billions of dollars annually off our incarcerated brothers and sisters talking to their family. And we know the correlation between people who are connected to folks in the community coming out and the recidivism rate being lower. And we're charging people to talk to their kids and their mothers. Like, so in Massachusetts, we're working to pass legislation to ban for-profit phone calls. We're working to pass legislation to not put our tax dollars towards building a $5 million jail. Like, really understand what is going on in your state, in your county, and find some legislators that are going to be willing to pass some bills. And if they ain't, get them out of office and get some new people in there that are willing to create some real changes.
And I'll say in Kentucky, in our Voting Rights Coalition and Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, if you don't know, kftc.org, we do a lot of grassroots lobbyist trainings, teaching folks how to get engaged in that legislative process, how to follow a bill, how to engage with those decision makers. But yeah, Katie hit it right on the head. Like, understand those policies, figure out how to get engaged, figure out how to begin shifting that narrative so that we can continue, as Brother Gregory said, to have that bifocus on the individual, but also on the systemic piece of that. Thank you, Katie.
During the pandemic, our sheriff department started making money off of making masks, right? Like, so these are things that, like, pay attention. Just like, that was crazy. He wouldn't let anyone out of jail because of risk of COVID, but he's making a profit off of COVID. It was sick. It's gross. We're going to get him out of office next year, but just pay attention to what's going on and be connected, right? Like, be connected.
And I think Katie has hit the nail on the head. It's like, if you can't change the policy, you change the person who's responsible for the policy. And I think that's one of the things that the faith-based community has kind of like shied away from, because, you know, in the example she given about the sheriff may be doing some things in the community, but he's causing more harm than good. You know, he may give out a turkey dinner for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but what are you doing the other 10 months of the year? He's housing our people and making money off the backs of them. And so I think that's the message about the more we continue to educate ourselves and our communities about how these systems operate, you know, the better would be for it. And I think, you know, especially around the franchise, you know, and I think it was Gregory was talking about, you know, folks being disenfranchised. There's no direct correlation between a person going to prison and losing their right to vote. There's none. There's no criminal statute in this country. I worked in the prison library for over 20 years. There's no criminal statute in this country that says you go to prison, you catch a case, you lose your right to vote. All of those are collateral consequences that from Jim Crow that folks have put in place that's kind of like doing their bidding for them today. And it's our responsibility as people who are truth tellers to tell people the truth, you know? And I think our job should be easy. It shouldn't be hard telling people the truth, you know, because truth has a way of finding favor or disfavor. Some people hear that truth and will applaud it. But at the same time, some people hear that same truth and get rocks in their jaws. And I tell people every day, accountability is not an attack. You know, accountability is not an attack. We just want you to be accountable. And so I think the example that Katie laid out about these sheriffs and stuff, it's like just the eye opener. That's just kind of like starting to peel the onion back to see what's there. And one last thing, Katie, when you was talking about the cost of the phone calls, right in Connecticut, they just passed a law in Connecticut where they banned charging families for jail phone calls. And you can kind of like Google by Bianca Tylick, Work Rises, and they the one led that campaign to kind of like get some insight about, you know, in the sense and try to reinvent the wheel. Somebody have already done it, you know, just follow that roadmap.
To our panelists, we want to know if it's all right if folks can reach out to you directly for more information. If it's okay to give them your information, and this way, if they want to talk to you offline and say, hey, Chibueze, we're trying to do this thing, or, you know, I appreciate what you had to say, you know, help us navigate through this. So we want to know if that's okay, that we would be more than willing to do that to make sure. And we're going to make sure that you get Bonifacio's handouts too. So you all have registered, so we have your names. And so we'll make sure, Nina, we have registered names, right? So we can send people some information. So we can do that as well. I just wanted to mention that. If you all want to stay and we keep going, we just keep going.
Okay, I see a question in the chat about, would it help if churches were helping host expungement clinics? How much does that process help? Any of the panelists, please feel free to jump in on that one as well.
Can you say the question again?
Would it help if churches were helping host expungement clinics? How much does that process help?
Yes, I can testify to that. I mean, we haven't done one since COVID hit, but hopefully in the not too distant future, we will start back up ourselves. Because when you do expungement clinics, there's so many other issues tied to that. You know, of course, it's about how do you get the record expunged. And one of the main things is to get it expunged so people can have their voting rights restored, and to not have that stigma, have that box there when they go to get employment. Folks can automatically just not consider their application. So that's a critical piece, because you start to dig into, you know, how folk get into this situation in the first place, right? So I've learned a lot from those types of clinics, especially if you got somebody that really knows what they're doing. I would highly recommend that churches host one of them and get other churches to go in with you. You really learn a lot from it.
There's a clean slate movement that's going on across the country, a clean slate campaign to do just that. The person who is in charge of the ED, her name is Sheena Mead out of Orlando, Florida. And so you kind of like just can Google her, and they'll come to a town near you, and kind of like, because it's more like Greg says, it's more intricate than just expungement, because in some places legislation have to change and actually to get the record completely cleaned. You know, some places they'll remove certain things, and then we'll say, okay, well, for your eyes only, just for law enforcement. Well, you haven't really cleaned my record. And so in some cases they take legislation. So they have this clean slate campaign that's going on across the country. It kind of like started with ban in the box, and it kind of like morphed into clean slate, because even with ban in the box, people still know, because people now, it just hire these background people who do their dirty work for them. And then they come back and say, oh no, they got extensive criminal history. Don't hire them, don't rent them an apartment or whatever. And so, no, I think folks need to seek all these other resources that there and see how can they partner. And like the conversation started, how can we build relationships with people who are doing this work on behalf of other people?
And I just want to add to that, part of the real issue is oftentimes is not that people won't hire formerly incarcerated people, they won't pay them. They want to use that stigma against them. We'll hire you to do the work, but since you got this strike against you, you just accept what we give you. No, that's unjust. You know, that people deserve an honest day's wage for an honest day's work, regardless of what has happened for them. That's just to be a fundamental principle of labor and working, and what the work that you do and the value of that work has no, should not be impacted. It really has no relationship to whether or not you've been to prison. It has to do with what the work that you do.
think there's, I see folks dropping off, but I know that there's like one more question. I know we've got to go. I think, yeah, it's probably better to just kind of wrap up there unless anybody has any final things to say, anything to add, anything that for the good of the whole that could be mentioned in this last second or two.
I just want to kind of like lift up. I appreciate the opportunity to share and learn. You know, because you say the teachers to learn twice. You know, so I've kind of like, matter of fact, Greg said something earlier, and I was trying to write it all down, and I kind of like missed him. Like, well, the first time I heard that, putting that way. You know, so you know the opportunity to teach or to share and to learn was kind of like welcoming. And again, you know, for folks who, you know, the first thing is folks have to put themselves in a vulnerable position to want to hear the truth. And so for the folks who showed up to hear what folks had to say something really about them in the sense that they're trying to figure out how they can be a part of changing this dynamic, you know? So I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share.
Okay, and we want to thank all the panelists that have joined us this afternoon. And we want to remind you again of who they are. Reverend Gregory Bentley, co-moderator for Presbyterian Church USA from Huntsville, Alabama. Norris Henderson, founder and executive director with formerly Voice of the Ex-Offender in New Orleans, Louisiana. Monica Jenner with Fair Chances in Lansing, Michigan. Minister Chibueze Okori, Church of the Gethsemane in Brooklyn, New York. Katie Talbot, Neighbor to Neighbor in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And Bonifacio Alemani, Health Equity Program Manager with LifeSpring Health Systems here in Louisville, Kentucky. And we want to also, for those of you that may have missed it, remind you that Presbyterian Church USA, through Presbyterian Committee on the Self-Development of People, has actually partnered with organizations that three of our panelists are representing, Norris, Monica, as well as Katie. So we're grateful for your partnership, and certainly grateful for the partnership of all of you that have served as our panelists today. We so appreciate the wisdom that you have shared. And at this moment, we would like to also say to you that as those of you that were listening and learning along with everyone else, that we hope that you will take what you have shared, what has been shared today, and be able to put it to use in your communities. We hope also that you'll be able to use the resources that have been shared today, and perhaps even be in further contact with any of our panelists that are willing to further engage in that way. So at this point, I would like to ask for the closing prayer, and that is being brought to us by the person that started us off when we started off, the Reverend Dr. Michael Askew.
Let us pray. Our Creator, our God, our King, our friend, our brother, our sister, the one who called into existence this world. When you created the world, you spoke and it was so, and you said it was good. Somewhere along the way, Lord, all of your goodness was tampered with. It was tampered with by things that affect us in many different ways. And so we have heard the voices of those who are trying to correct the wrongs of this world. It is through their voices that we find the good. I want to thank you, Lord, for each and every one who has presented. And once again, I thank you for the work of self-development of people. It is the ministry of the whole church. It reaches out to many people. It gives that hand up, and it gives people the opportunity to use their voices to correct the wrongs of this world. And so as we leave this moment that we have come to share, continue to be with us and bless us in our work, in our life, and in our service to you. We thank you. We lift you up. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen, everybody. Go in peace, and we will let you know about future Struggle is Real episodes that will happen next year. We're excited that you are here, and we hope that you will continue to walk with us as we know the struggle is real, and we want to continue to equip the church for the things it needs to do the incredible ministry to which we call. Go in peace. Thank you all for this incredible time together.
Thank you all.
And
Thank
you to
you.
our incredible panel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wonderful program. Thank you all.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you. And they should be 2 hours, Becky. They should be.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much. And I think this is the best thing that came out of COVID is all these Zoom opportunities. I feel so much more connected to the national church. So thank you for the time and effort you have to put into these.
Thank you.